Adrenaline 101, writing with emotional intensity. So I'm going to switch over to my presentation screen now. All right, you should be getting my screen now. And I'm going to show you, I'll start out with an actual pretest. The pretest question about writing with intensity is true or false. Suspense comes from not knowing what's going to happen. What do you guys think? This is a picture from Hitchcock's Rear Window. He was the expert in suspense. Do you guys think suspense comes from not knowing what's going to happen? Well, in my opinion, that's false. Suspense comes from knowing what's going to happen and then being totally freaked out about it. So here's a scene from Dial M for Murder. We have the murderer hiding right behind the heroine who's blind, and she's on the phone trying to call for help. We know the murderer's in the room. We know he's coming after her, and this is terrible. So it's actually knowing something, revealing something that generates tension in the story. So this is kind of different from what I thought when I first started writing, which was, shouldn't the reader not know what's going to happen? Won't that create anxiety? Not right. The reader has to know what's going on, and that has to terrify them or else really excite them. And that's what will keep them reading the story. So it's creating intensity is about what we reveal, not about what we keep back. When it comes to suspense, the important thing to remember is that if the reader doesn't know what to expect, then they don't care what's happening in the story. So if we kind of go back and look at something like Jurassic Park, we can see elements of tension building early on in the film. Foreshadowing is using the power of suggestion to create an expectation in the reader's mind. So the power of the scene is not what's happening, but where it is in the film. Here we have an unscrupulous bad guy giving a can of Barbasol, which has been specially modified to protect dinosaur embryos, to this unscrupulous worker who's then going to take dinosaur embryos off the island. It's a terrible idea. And because it's happening early in the movie, it's freaking us out for the whole movie. So some of the corollaries to this are that there's a difference between tension building elements and tension resolving elements. And in horror films, tension building elements are things that create in us fear. And in general, fear comes from the unknown. So there's a balance in revealing clues about an enemy versus actually revealing the identity of the enemy, because revealing the identity of the enemy is actually a tension resolving element. So we want to delay revealing the face of the monster as long as possible, because as long as we don't know, then we feel like we're losing our mind, which is true terror. And in romance, we'll tend to delay the first kiss because suspense and romance build intensity, whereas violence and intimacy are the resolving of that tension. I used to think of that violence and intimacy were what created tension in a story, but they're actually what resolve the intensity. So we are here to pump up your story with lots of intensity, and we'll go through a couple of methods on how to do that. The game plan is follow my simple 3-step method to creating intensity in your story. Step number 1 is to create momentum. And we do that by creating wants for the point of view character. The stronger the point of view character wants something, to get off Tatooine, for Harry Potter to have a family, then the stronger that the forces that we have in the story pushing against that create tension. Forces are generated by revealing something. We can reveal things through dialogue or through action, but those forces that act on the momentum create tension. And the last thing is to employ using what we call time stalling or a time dilation, where we freeze the moment and we pull the reader into the point of view character's perspective by telling them about the physical, emotional, and cognitive responses that are happening inside the point of view character. This generates internal conflict, and it lets the reader know what might happen in the future as the main character contemplates that. It gives them something additional to worry about. We're going to give some specific examples from some really great writers on this, so you'll have something to reference. But first, we want to talk about what to not do. And in bad writing, what we have is just a sequence of seemingly uncorrelated events. And we don't know why these events are being explained to us, and we're certainly not interested in them because we're not emotionally invested. So this is the worst type of writing. And if you see it, you'll recognize it. And you can improve it by creating stimulus response. You can have sequences of causes and effects. This is typically what beginning male writers do. They're driven by action. And so they'll have a series of actions that causing consequences. So we know what's happening. We know why it's happening, but we really don't care about it. My wife, for instance, will fall asleep during action scenes in movies or even in books because she's not emotionally invested in them. And so we need to be able to find a way to get readers emotionally invested in action scenes. This is done in intense writing. And intense writing, we see the characters reacting physically, emotionally, and cognitively, and then they respond. So with some sort of action. This type of immersive or deep POV storytelling takes us from just seeing what's happening in the story to feeling like the story is happening to us. We connect so strongly with the main character that we feel like the story is happening to us. So that's why we care about it. So we'll talk a little bit about how and when to do it. But first, let's talk about generating tension in a story. I'm a physicist, so we'll do a little bit of physics here. Forces in physics, according to quantum field theory, are generated when two particles exchange a virtual particle, like a photon, which mediates the electromagnetic force. Essentially, when these particles find out about each other, there's a force that arises, either attractive or repulsive. And the same thing happens in stories. We get, when somebody's want or their intent is made manifest, this can generate a competition for a state of being or some sort of common objective. And a competition for a state of being is a repulsive force. This is when the two people want something that's different. Someone wants to rule the world and someone doesn't want them to rule the world. Another great example is when you have an argument and one person wants people to believe them and somebody else wants to be believed, and both can't be believed because their stories are different. So this is a way to create a repulsive force or repulsive tension in a story. Creating a common objective, creating a situation where people only win together, this creates an attractive force. And I'm going to give some examples of that in just a moment. But both of these forces are most powerful in a story setting that has momentum or inertia, where we have some status quo and the forces are trying to overcome that. That's when we really feel the tension. Let's use Twilight as an example. Bella Swan is the main character, and she has several emotional needs, and these add layers of tension to the story. She wants to be accepted for who she is, yet she wants to be special. Yet she wants to be not to be noticed or to be abnormal, yet she wants to satisfy her inner curiosity about this Edward character. So all of these things are not easy to simultaneously satisfy, and that's pretty realistic, actually. I think we'll find that most of the women in my life have many competing interests at different times and at different situations. And the key to the success of Twilight is that Edward gets in the way of all of these things. If she wants to be with Edward, then she can't be normal. And if she's with Edward, then she knows that he's special and she's not. So Edward generates both repulsive and attractive forces. And this is what really makes it compelling for teen readers. So we're going to get into a little bit more of this. Actually, we'll look at a scene from Twilight to see how this is done. If you can generate layers in your story, for instance, in sci-fi, let's think about a sci-fi character like a ship captain. He wants to be loyal to his crew, but he also wants to be loyal to his orders that he's received from his commanding officer. So here we have competing emotional needs that create tension in the story. And we can build on that. And this is where a lot of the drama in Star Trek comes from. So I'm not going to have a lot of time to get into this. It's kind of worth its own thing. But if your story is too boring, put a deadline in there and just make sure you're ramping consequences with every scene in every chapter. This is story arc tension. From here on out, we're going to talk about scene tension. I think there's a lot of other presentations on how to generate really interesting storylines. I just thought I'd mention this. Ticking time bombs, you can't go wrong. So in dialogue, we want to generate repulsive forces so we can have a tension between a protagonist and an antagonist. So let's go back to this argument where I come in and I have a story and I want to convince everyone that there's some imminent danger, but somebody else in the room has an ulterior motive. They want to tell people that there is no danger. So the way I create tension in the scene is by creating an imbalance of power. I give the antagonist something that the protagonist doesn't have, such as I make them stronger, like a bully. They can simply push them out of the room, or they could hurt them if they say something. Another good example would be if the antagonist knows something that the protagonist doesn't know. And by revealing this, they can discredit the protagonist's information. Or they could even reveal something that would embarrass the main character, or to coerce them that they shouldn't say something. Popularity and influence are really powerful. I've been in a room where I've laid out a lot of reasons for doing something, and a really charismatic person in the room just says, yeah, we're not going to do that. And everyone just says, yeah, okay. And they go along with it. And I'm like, but wait, I just explained exactly why in 6 pages of logic, and I just swept aside by someone else's charisma. But even more powerful than that is an authority figure who can hold something over the head of the protagonist. So as we build this scene, we want to have successive revelations of information that back the character into a corner, or that expose weaknesses and vulnerabilities. And we want to stage them so that at the end of the scene, we drop the real hammer, the real surprise, or the big thing that changes the status quo at the end of the scene. That's the crap test. At the end of the scene, our readers should say, oh, crap. And the main character is really in trouble now. So I've got that trademark there. Feel free to use that. Just if your scene does not have an oh crap at the end of it, it might be a crappy scene. Hopefully you remember that. Check your scenes, design them if you can, so that you have increasing revelations up to this big one at the end. So here's a great example of that. This is from Orson Scott Card. He has a recent book called Children of the Fleet. David is the main character. He's a really smart kid, and his battle school instructor doesn't want to believe what he's told him, because this would, if she had to reveal what he said, then this would really embarrass her. I've given you a chance to do your duty, just in case some part of you still cares about that. The battle school instructor says, for a powerless child, you have an obnoxious mouth. I'm offering you a chance to do the right thing. You're offering me a chance to humiliate myself. What if I'm telling the truth? Children's brains are simply incapable of grasping the adult world. If you tell other children or teachers the absurd story you just told me, I will put you in therapeutic confinement, because that will discredit your story completely. Do you understand? Probably not, said David, since I have an incapable mind, but I'll do my best. David walked to the door of her office. I haven't dismissed you, she said. Notice that we're using authority here to drive home the point that she has total control over him. She had to trigger the door, so he would have to wait. You will never have access to the Ansible again, David. This is the hammer she's dropping. She's locked him completely out of the communication system. Now he can't tell anybody about the problem that he's discovered. He heard the door open behind. He turned and left. So Orson Scott Card here creating some great, he is the master of witty banter, and he's creating a lot of tension in the scene by creating an imbalance of power, and then successive revelations here where the battle school instructor is dropping these bombs. I'll put you in therapeutic confinement, essentially. I'll claim you're mentally insane, and I'll lock you out of the communication system. So this is creating some definite tension in the scene, and it ends with this sort of aha moment here at the end, the oh crap moment, right? So let's go on and let's talk about attractive forces. This is what we want in a scene or even a romance. One of the things we can do is to create symbolism through commonality. So we do make successive revelations about characters, and they discover that they both like the same thing. Maybe they grew up in the same area, or they both had an experience where someone who they trusted took advantage of them. As they share these experiences, these revelations create a commonality that they're shared, and that creates attractive tension. Characters also can express thoughts for each other. If one character is feeling something and the other character says, it just voices that exact feeling, it's so wonderful to be in a situation where you feel like nobody understands you and somebody just comes out and says exactly what you're feeling. There's a connection there, right? There's information that's exchanged that creates a shared state of being, that reveals a shared state of being, and that creates attractive tension. One of my favorite methods for creating attractive tension is using symbolism. So we can see this oftentimes in movies, but I think of scenes where the protagonist and the antagonist have some incidental contact. Maybe their hands touch, but he doesn't move his hand away from hers. He just holds it there. And for a moment, they both know that they each know that they're touching each other. And as long as they're touching, there's that shared state of being. And that creates a tremendous attractive force. I also really like the idea of symbolic things. For instance, you might have a can of soda and he drinks from it and sets it down on the table and she looks him in the eye and then she drinks from it. Well, to a guy, what this is saying is, I'm overlooking something like germs or whatever because I want to share this with you. And this may gross somebody out, but to somebody else, it might be a way of sharing something. So maybe later in the story, he drinks the entire can and doesn't leave any for her because he's, disgusted with her, or maybe she leaves a can for him, a can of soda for him because she knows he's feeling bad or whatever. So these shared objects can become symbolic throughout the story. And just like scents, strong smells will remind us of emotions we felt in the past, in stories, these objects take that same role of reminding us of emotions that we felt in the past. One last thing you can do is have a character use another character's catchphrase. So for instance, someone's in a situation where they're feeling something and the other character just comes out and says their tagline or their catchphrase and everyone laughs, and this creates an attractive tension. One of the things we really want to do, especially in screenplays, is leave unsaid what can be shown. And especially in writing, when we're trying to show don't tell, we don't want to show and tell. That's just the worst. A great way to do understatement is for a woman to say, I love you, and him to just not say anything. Then we can go to internal dialogue and get in his mind, and he can think about what the consequences will be if he says this, or think about, generate some momentum by bringing up some backstory. Understatement is very powerful. It can generate some very powerful attractive forces by keeping things bottled up and leaving us expecting. Here's a scene from James Patterson. James Patterson writes thrillers. He has a recent book called The Haunted. The main character is like a cop or something like that. And he says, "The morning was perfect as I held her hand and just strolled along. She made me feel alive and connected. It was hard to explain considering how much of my life had changed in the past decade. A few years ago, there was no way I could have predicted that I'd be walking with this beautiful Irish girl along a serene lake in Maine and have a huge horde of kids waiting for me, and that I would love every minute of it. I happily listened as Mary Catherine told me about her camping trips in Ireland. Somehow I didn't miss the fact that I had never camped as a child. Then she stopped and took my other hand as well. We were facing each other with the perfect lake and forest background surrounding us. There was something on her mind." This scene has a couple of things that really help the tension. One of the things is that he starts with some backstory, and that generates momentum. And then he has this shared experience with her about camping. For some reason, even though he's never been camping before, he can share this feeling with her. And that's typical of being in love or infatuation. For some reason, we start to care about things the other person cares about. So he's generated some attractive tension there. Then she stops and takes his other hand. This is, again, the symbolic method of generating tension. We were facing each other with the perfect lake and forest background surrounding us. Now the objects around them had taken on a symbolic meaning of representing their shared state. There's something on her mind. This is saying everything is perfect and she's about to say something. This foreshadows to us that what she's going to say is going to perhaps alter that perfect moment. And so we keep reading. This is a great example of how to generate tension. There's no dialogue here. There's action. And so, but by revealing things, especially with this internal dialogue, you can see how he's generating tension. So time. This is the tactic that we're going to use occasionally. And this is really the big gun we pull out when we really want to pull the reader into the point of view character's perspective and create a powerful moment that they're going to remember. As an example, we're going to have a character, Derek, who's going to get shot. And what we're going to do is we're going to start with a lizard brain, the core, which is really just controlling motion and in your physical body. And on top of that is built the mammal brain, which adds emotion to that. And on top of that is built the human brain, which adds cognition. So the first thing that happens, Derek hit the floor. His shoulder felt like it had been hit by a truck. So now we're describing to a reader who's never been shot what it feels like to get hit by something so powerful it knocks you to the floor and rips a part out of your body. Okay, and at this point, the reader really gets hit in the stomach. Then we're gonna follow up with Derek's reaction, emotional reaction. For the first time in his life, he wondered if he was dying. How would you feel if you got shot? Is it disbelief? Is it anger? Is it panic? Or like he's doing, are you simply going to wonder if you're dying? And then we go to the cognitive reaction. Derek has to think about what his options are and consider them, because as he does that, the reader now has an opportunity to freak out about each of these options and the possible consequences. If he sat up to slow the bleeding in his shoulder, the gunman would see the movement. So now we can freak out about that, right? And then he's going to think about if he just lays there and bleeds to death, then we can freak out about that. So we want to get one of these. We want to get one of these darned if you do, darned if you don't situations. That's what the cognitive reaction is for. And we use these like spices. I was really surprised as I went through Stephenie Meyer and Orson Scott Card and James Patterson. I was really surprised they didn't use this very often. You'd find physical, emotional, and cognitive reactions sprinkled in through their dialogue, but only in very special moments where they pull out this really intense time-slowing action. So let me give you an example here. You'll see some of the things used here. See if you can find them. Look especially for internal dialogue or cognition, and look for some tension building through attractive tension, where where a commonality is established. The Cullens don't come here, he said in a tone that closed the subject, ignoring her question. I stared at the deep-voiced boy, taken aback, but he was looking away toward the dark forest behind us. He'd said that the Cullens didn't come here, but his tone had implied something more, that they weren't allowed. They were prohibited. His manner left a strange impression on me, and I tried to ignore it without success. Jacob interrupted my meditation. So is Forks driving you insane yet? Oh, I'd say that's an understatement. I grimaced. He grinned understandingly. I was still turning over the brief comment on the Cullens, and I had a sudden inspiration. It was a stupid plan, but I didn't have any other better ideas. Okay, what's going on in this scene? We start out with a revelation. The Cullens don't come here. Then we get her emotional reaction to that. She was taken aback, right? Then we get her cognitive reaction. She's mulling over what he said, and she's emphasizing now that there is something that was left unsaid. So we get some foreshadowing. And then to interrupt that, Jacob is now going to create some commonality. They both think Forks is just the worst. So this creates some attractive tension here. And then she goes back to mulling this over, and now she's thinking about what she can do next. So she's contemplating the future. This is more cognitive. So we get a couple of emotional reactions in cognitive. Obviously, she's not having a physical reaction in this scene yet. But if Edward was there, you can bet she'd be having a physical reaction in addition to the emotional and the cognitive reaction. James Patterson, early in the same story, the hard-nosed cop is in a fight scene here. So notice how you'll get the physical, emotional, and cognitive all in a row right here at the beginning. He sprang back, but he still had the gun in his hand. Now I had an overturned table to duck behind as he fired around. I felt the impact on the heavy wood. Physical. The sharp blast in the hushed silence of the library was startling, emotional. Nothing like this had ever happened before in Butler Library. Cognitive. The effect was immediate. I heard screaming and saw students starting to scatter. In my hand. There were more screams. I had to trust that the security guard, Todd, was already on the phone calling for help. More cognitive. Right now, it was my job to make sure no bystanders got shot. So he has to protect the people. But I couldn't let this kid get away either. So darned if he doesn't, darned if he does. He wasn't just a killer. He was the key to breaking this drug ring and stopping the killing. Again, increasing the consequences, increasing the tension. Then I lost sight of him completely. I was worried about stumbling into an ambush. That's what I would do, stage an ambush, if I were as desperate as Diego was. Here, the cognitive reaction is outlining a possible future, which we can now freak out about. I paused at the end of a long line of books. I took in a couple of breaths and focused. And what's going to happen when he turns around the corner? An ambush. And we keep reading because we know what's going to happen now because he's foreshadowed it. So here's a great example of, again, physical, emotional, cognitive, when the guy shoots the table. So it was interesting. I thought, there was this really intense book I read as a kid called The Sum of All Fears by Tom Clancy. I'll bet he does this. I read Tom Clancy. I looked at page after page. He doesn't use this at all. And I was totally intrigued to see how Tom Clancy generates tension. He does it completely differently, which just goes to show you that everything you learn in these writing classes may be completely wrong. I think a lot of the key elements are here, but he uses them differently. What he does at the beginning of every scene, he explains to you which character the scene's going to be about. He jumps scenes and has, some guy at a military outpost, and then some evil guy in some other place, and some agent in another place. And in the first few paragraphs, he gives you backstory on the character to generate momentum. So we get aligned with that character and we know what their wants are. And then when he goes to dialogue or action, he doesn't stop. He interjects almost no emotion, almost no cognitive reactions. He just lets the scene roll, almost like a movie. And this is a really cool method. It's pretty powerful. Can't write like that, but he does, and it's powerful. He also has scenes where he shows us what the enemies are doing, and that creates a lot of tension. By revealing what's going to happen, we keep reading the book to find out when it will happen. That generates momentum. And the foreshadowing is powerful. A lot of the scenes are crafted to produce shock and awe, with successive revelations happening throughout the scene, with the biggest one at the end. So he passes the oh crap test. And in most of his scenes, a few of his scenes, though, are just purely internal dialogue. These are the magic ones, where the main character, Jack Ryan, or his wife, is thinking about a really critical problem. These scenes are critical for helping us to get character development, and they work just like magic in his story. Not all of his scenes are internal conflict. Very few of them, actually. But these are the methods that he uses to generate tension in his stories. I thought it was worth mentioning. So here's the workshop portion. What I'd like you guys to do is, as I read through this passage from a work in progress of mine, look for places where I generate momentum, look for places where I generate forces, and maybe where I use some internal conflict. This is from a book called Don't Go in the Cornfield. Dear Leon and Angel, I'm going back into the cornfield. I don't know if you'll forget me too. I don't know what will happen. I know we promised. I know I shouldn't even think about it. I just have to do this. I can't go on forever trying to hold on to something we never should have lost. I have to know what happened to Eric. I have to tell him I'm sorry. Eric was everything that I wasn't. It's no wonder I looked right through him. Everyone did. People forgot him faster than the truck. I'm all he has now. Every day since last Halloween, I wrote about him in my journal. But the moment I close the book, I begin to doubt. It's like waking up from a dream. After a few seconds, it starts to slip away. I don't know if it's even possible to find him, but I have to try. Eric is real. He needs a friend. If I don't come back, please don't forget me. Love, Kate. So what do we have here? What did you guys find? Where do I first generate momentum in the story? Where did I first reveal her intent? It's in the first sentence. Her intention, I'm going back into the cornfield. And then I set up alternative options here. She says, if I go in, you might forget me. So she's darned if she does. And then I generate some internal conflict, right? I get you inside her head. She knows that she shouldn't even think about it, right? This is her emotional reaction. Okay. Then we move ahead, and she says, I have to tell him I'm sorry. Sorry about what? This is a mystery. The mystery is a special kind of momentum generating tactic. The mystery is telling the reader that there's something that they don't know. So it's a revelation of a sort, right? And also we learn about this truck. What is this truck? There's a truck that disappeared? And so you're going to look through the story for a place where she does something to Eric or where the truck disappears. So this is a great way to create momentum. Then after that, I talk about what it's like for her living without going back into the cornfield. She has this experience every day where she begins to forget something that she believes. And so she's darned if she doesn't. So this is creating two opposing forces. And then at the end, the big revelation, if she doesn't come back, then she'll be forgotten mystically as well. So this is the oh crap moment. She's going to disappear and be forgotten if she goes back in the cornfield. So this is my attempt to sort of create some intensity in the first scene of the book. Here's the overview of what we've learned so far. We're going to set up momentum in the story. We're going to use revealing to create forces. And then in critical moments, we're going to list physical, emotional, and cognitive reactions in that order to pull people into the point of view characters, into the main character's point of view. And that's it. That's how we're going to do it. If you guys are interested in more of this type of stuff, check out my YouTube channel, Sci-Fi Fantasy Fun channel. I've got other tutorials that I've given for LDS beta readers that will dovetail nicely with this one. And I've got a lot of books coming out this year. Blade of Turan just came out. Check out the Forgotten Ares series. If you're into young adult fantasy, This is 5 children of an emperor who are born in secret in different realms and have to come together to save the kingdom. So thanks for your time, and check out all the other really cool sessions at the Beta Readers Conference.